Chapter 4, Topic 4.4, the Protozoa. In this topic we will be discussing the protozoa. Some of this will be review from Chapter 1, but we will be adding depth and detail to the basics you learned in Chapter 1. Specifically, we're going to talk about protozoan form and function, nutrition and habitat range, life cycles and reproduction, and classification of selected pathogens. At the end of this recorded lecture, you should be able to use protozoan characteristics to explain why they are informally placed in a single group, list 3 means of locomotion by protozoa, explain why a cyst stage might be useful to a protozoan, and give examples of a disease caused by each of the 4 types of protozoa. As a reminder from Chapter 1, remember that protozoan is a term of convenience. If an organism doesn't fit into another eukaryotic kingdom, such as animal or plant, it got tossed in with the protozoans. Make sure you review Chapter 1 to remember what characteristics they do share. Because it's one of the learning objectives for this topic, let's discuss means of locomotion. Originally, protozoa were classified by how they moved around their environment, mostly because we didn't have anything else to go on. But it made sense that a mode of movement would be passed down from the cell that first invented it, so to speak, to its descendants. If only it could have been that simple. Oh well. Some protozoans moved by forming temporary extensions of their cells called pseudopods, or false feet. They ooze around their environment, engulfing their prey by circling their pseudopods around them and sucking them on in. Some swim around by means of cilia. Some have flagella, which, if you remember, are basically long cilia. They have the same internal structure as cilia anyway. And some are non-modal. They either wait for water, wind, or some other environmental factor to move them around, or they rely on a vector to move them to a new host. Mosquitoes are the most common vector of protozoan diseases that require a vector. The textbook says that protozoa are heterotrophic, or they eat other creatures rather than making sugars from sunlight. This is true of pathogenic protozoa and non-pathogenic protozoa. But there are some non-pathogenic protozoa, such as the euglena that you saw in lab, which are photosynthetic. Some are mixotrophs, meaning they photosynthesize when the sun is shining, but when darkness comes they change into monstrous predators, spreading terror across the countryside. Well, they must be monstrous if you are their microscopic prey. Think about it. How would you feel about trees that if, once the sun set, they started breaking in windows and dragging children out of their beds and eating them? Actually, that does sound like the plot of some horror flicks. Back to protozoa. We find them living and reproducing anywhere it's moist. As we'll discuss in the next slides, we can find cysts in dry environments, but they're just hanging out, waiting for things to moisten up again. Many protozoa have life cycles that alternate between the trophozoite, or feeding stage, and the cyst, or the resting stage, such as shown in this figure. Cysts are somewhat like endospores in that they are resistant to drying, lack of food, and they are very hard to kill. One pathogenic protozoan, Cryptosporidium, has been causing problems in public swimming pools in northern Utah the past few summers. In its trophozoite phase in the human intestine, it causes severe, long-lasting diarrhea. It passes from human to human in the cyst stage, which is resistant to chlorine. Here's a plausible scenario for what's been happening in Utah. The family has a trip planned to the community swimming pool, and they bring a toddler that hasn't been potty trained yet. They put the kid in swimmer diapers. That's what they're designed for. Well, the kid is starting to get diarrhea and is shedding cysts, and a few leak past the swimmer diaper. The cysts are completely unfazed by the chlorine in the pool, which does an excellent job on the intestinal and skin bacteria of everybody in the pool. The cysts are picked up by another human host, and soon the entire family is ill with Cryptosporidium-caused diarrhea, because it is extremely hard to keep GI pathogens from spreading within a family. By the way, in the affected areas in Utah, they have banned swimmer diapers, which is why I use that example. But the cysts could have been passed by potty-trained individuals that are recovering and decide to celebrate by going swimming. The cysts are around the anus and come off in the swimming pool. But not all protozoa have a cyst stage. If they are pathogen, they have to be passed directly from fluid to fluid because they can't survive possible drying. I refer you to the table on major pathogenic protozoa, which is coming up, specifically Trichomonas vaginalis, and Plasmodium, which causes malaria. Hint, hint. So let's take a look at this chart. Saying, make sure that you know at least one example of each group is a little vague if you're trying to study for the exam, but I will offer some hints here of my favorites. Also, if it shows up in the news, it's guaranteed to be discussed in lecture. If we discuss it in lecture, it will show up on the exam. Well, that's it for this topic. You should now be able to do the following. Use protozoan characteristics to explain why they are informally placed in a single group. List 3 means of locomotion by protozoa. Explain why a cis stage might be useful to a protozoan, and give an example of a disease caused by each of the 4 types of protozoa.